Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chérie Johnston.
Thank you so much, Jack. Next slide, please. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. This is the next installment in our Frontline Leadership Professional Development Guest Speaker Series. Next slide, please. Today's event is hosted by the Panasonic Veterans Business Impact Group. Our group's objectives are to bring our employees together through networking, mentorship, and community engagement, while leveraging our own unique military experience and leadership skills to foster better collaboration within Panasonic's workforce. Further, to recognize our community of employee veterans alongside the family and friends of military veterans who support and encourage one another through our shared experiences. In bringing together our unique background of military service, leadership, and dedication, we hope to capitalize on these strengths to better serve our companies, communities, and customers through veteran recruitment activities, career development ideas, professional development like today, growth, and retention. The Veterans Group is open to all Panasonic employees who are interested in joining. If you are a United States military veteran, please reach out to us to self-identify. We will display the email address at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Introducing our veterans leadership team members. First and foremost, Joe Howry is the executive sponsor of the Veterans Business Impact Group. Joe is a graduate of West Point and served in the United States Air Force. He is currently the Vice President of Supply Chain at Panasonic North America. Our program has been incredibly honored to have his guidance and leadership. I am Chérie Johnston. I'm the current president of the Veterans Business Impact Group for our group of Panasonic North American companies. I've been with Panasonic Avionics specifically nearly 10 years now. My background, graduate education, is in international business. My father-in-law, and my spouse were all United States Marines. My former spouse is a retired United States Marine that I met at the very start of his time in the service. So I was able to walk the journey, the full course of his career from the early 1990s until his retirement in 2012. My father-in-law retired after 30 years as a naval officer. In 2010, our son founded a nonprofit organization to recognize and acknowledge the sacrifices of the U.S. military children, which I'm still the volunteer CEO of today. Finally, for nearing 5 years, I've been an official community partner to the United States Army. Next, Jared Derensberg. Jared is a former United States Marine who not only served multiple combat tours, but also upon exiting the U.S. military and armed forces, carried on working overseas as an employee of the United States State Department. Jared has been with Panasonic Connect for nearly a decade as well, having entered through a special program, military veteran recruitment initiative that his specific company has. Jared is currently the vice president of our Veterans Business Impact Group and a passionate advocate for our U.S. veterans and this program. Next slide, please. To date, we've interviewed several very talented and engaging leaders. I specifically asked Lieutenant Colonel Johann Hindert to speak to us today on leadership because I was immediately impressed with him when we first met, not yet knowing his incredible career path. The Lieutenant Colonel is a seasoned communicator with the best interpersonal skills I've personally witnessed within the armed forces. He is not only scholarly, as evidenced by the captivating thesis he composed on German irregular warfare, and that's available and published on Amazon, by the way, and the fact that he speaks conversational Mandarin Chinese, but also personally in working with him the past few years with the U.S. Army, the excellent briefings and updates he provides, keeping myself, and other community leaders current on the many activities of the command that he runs right now, the Los Angeles Recruiting Battalion, 6th Recruiting Brigade, United States Army Recruiting Command. He has managed to reach out and engage the American public into our U.S. Army in a way that I have not previously witnessed before. In introduction, I do not want to go too deeply into his background because the Lieutenant Colonel will share with us today about his career journey that led him from Ohio to attending university in Michigan to South Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, and multiple other destinations globally. A highlight I will add is that the Lieutenant Colonel is a decorated Special Forces officer whose awards include 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, 2 Korea Defense Service Medals, the NATO Medal, the Special Forces tab, the Ranger tab, the Combat Infantryman Badge, the Expert Infantry Badge, the Military Freefall Parachutist Badge, which sounds so terrifying to me, and the Parachutist Badge, among several others. Finally, the Lieutenant Colonel holds a bachelor's degree in international studies and a master's of science degree in defense analysis from the Naval Postgraduate School in California. Next slide, please. Today's topic is titled Authentic and Engaged Leadership from the Front Lines to the Homeland. The Lieutenant Colonel will share with us how he transitioned from leading at the command level abroad into combat and back into the very public arena home in the USA. Next slide, please. Without further delay, Lieutenant Colonel Hindert, sir, please share your experiences and leadership thoughts with Panasonic.
Chérie, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Chérie and Jack, first off, thank you both. This is my first introduction by background with Joe and Jared. And so I am honored for this opportunity this morning and really feel privileged to speak with this team. I understand that we've got a large group of veterans, and so you all, as much as anybody, understand service, you understand sacrifice, and you understand leadership. So I thank you for your service. I believe we may also have some global or international partners on the net today, and I've had a privilege to work with various international partners myself. I want to thank you all as well. It's always an honor to serve with you, and I think what we find is we've got more in common than we have in terms of differences. So thank you. The topic today is leadership. I have my own perspective on leadership that's grounded in my experiences, my achievements, my failures, etc. And I know we all bring that to the table. I definitely don't, I'm not an expert in leadership. I think we're always learning, but I'm happy to share some of my perspective today. But I think more importantly, we'll probably get more out of some dialogue and question and answer and back and forth discussion. So I look forward to that very much. I think as we individually look at and try to understand what leadership means, again, it's grounded in our own personal experiences. You know, there's hundreds of books on leadership, but I think it helps to think about how do you define leadership as an individual. And for me, I always try to distill things down to the most basic form or simple models, and that'll be a bit of a theme today. But for me, it's at the end of the day, to simplify it, you try to motivate, inspire, and guide a group of individuals to achieve a collective result or results. That you see that in an early age in sports, you see it in business, and you obviously and definitely see it in the military. The great thing about the Army is in my 19 years plus of service now, I've had formal leadership training that may be in the form of Ranger School as an example, and again. In its simplest form, as an example, how do you get a group of people to move from point A to point B? As you know, let's say it's a small squad or platoon tactical operation, and then you add different challenges, whether it's lack of sleep, lack of food, stress, doing it at night, challenging security conditions, etc. And so that's kind of leadership at its most basic level, and I think that translates to a lot of different realms, sports included. But the Army, more beyond just training, it's a laboratory for leadership, right? Because as an officer, you come in right away and very quickly you're a platoon leader. That's the lowest level of leadership in the Army, and your background might be sports and college, etc. But all of a sudden you're thrust into a situation where you're looked at by 35 to 40 individuals to lead them both in garrison, combat, training, etc. And so right off the bat, you're thrown into the mix and you get an opportunity to start to define who you are as a leader, to learn from others, and kind of build your leadership skills. And then for most of us that have served in the last 20 years, we've got the training piece, we've got the laboratory piece or garrison leadership, and then we've got some combat experience more than likely. So that's the topic today. And moving forward, I'd like to talk about some leadership themes. And again, I think it helps to kind of create a model of leadership for yourself, and also to identify some themes that maybe translate across different types of leadership, whether it's tactical combat leadership, whether it's organizational leadership at the higher levels, kind of operational and strategic, or maybe it's small group leadership. Maybe you've got a team of 10 folks or less. But I'd like to start with the themes, and hopefully this will drive some conversation, if not now, when we get into the question and answer session. But as I think about leadership themes, authenticity and self-awareness stand out to me. Those are two things that sometimes, well, the self-awareness may take some time to develop as we mature, but I've also benefited from executive coaching. I've benefited from a lot of feedback and counseling throughout my career, just as many of you have, whether it's in your service period or in your professional civilian careers. But gaining that self-awareness, I think, is critical to understanding kind of where the gaps in your swing are, and then being able to communicate that to the people that you work with, and then kind of fill those gaps, whether it's through their strengths or just understanding how you need to mitigate that. And then back to the first one, the authenticity. I think it took me a while to find myself in my role in the Army and understand how I needed, how to be who I needed to be in the Army, growing up as an infantry platoon leader and then transitioning to Army Special Forces. But at the end of the day, you can't go wrong if you're authentic to who you are. There's the by the book leadership, and then there's the be authentic. What do you bring to the table as an individual and personality? And you kind of got to weave those together. The next two themes that I clumped together here would be every day when you're in a leadership position, which carries its own weight, of course. You know, to the degree possible, we try to bring a positive attitude. I talk about that with our team a lot. We've got 28 Army recruiting stations throughout Greater Los Angeles, and I can tell you that walking into a station, I can get a sense right away of kind of the mood and the culture and the climate. And I think that station commander, which is kind of the equivalent of a platoon leader for me, that station commander sets that and establishes that mood and climate every single day by the attitude that they bring. I try to think about it as, because we're not always happy, we're not always in a great mood, but when you're at work, when you're in the position in front of people, you kind of got to turn it on, and not in a fake way. You just got to bring out what's inside you and look for the best of you, and look for the best of the assignment that you're in, and turn that positive attitude on. And then similarly, having a sense of urgency, whether that's addressing problems or attacking opportunities. Maintaining a sense of urgency and applying that every single day, I think, is really important for us as leaders. Next would be to, and these kind of go hand in hand as well, recognizing and capitalizing on opportunities. And I think, many of you with your backgrounds, you can see that both in the civilian realm, and you can see it in combat or military capacity. So the leader is responsible for that, but obviously there's folks in your formation or folks that are on your team where you work that hopefully can bring that to your attention as well. But then when there is opportunity, you got to attack it and exploit it and take advantage. And then the other part, maybe the flip side of that coin, is how do we pull the reins back, or more importantly, how do we mitigate risk? And that's very important in combat situations, but I think it's also just as important in your current jobs with Panasonic. And if it wasn't, there probably wouldn't be so many books written about risk and mitigating risk, just like leadership. And then lastly is having those trusted advisors. It could be, in the military, maybe it's my command sergeant major, or it's my platoon sergeant, or my team sergeant. But in the civilian world, I know we've got the same, or you have the same. So having trusted advisors and setting the conditions where they feel comfortable to give you valuable feedback. So those are some themes, and again, hopefully those can spark some conversation later. But as I've progressed through my time in service, and ultimately, I'll hopefully transition to civilian leadership roles at some point. But I've had a lot of different types of leadership jobs, whether it's more of a combat arms infantry platoon, whether garrison or deployed, and same thing with an Army Special Forces detachment, a 12-man team deployed 11 months at a time, long periods of time, versus perhaps maybe being in charge of a small team that's responsible for supporting, in this case, it would have been a 2-star Air Force general responsible for all special operations on the Korean Peninsula. So how do we support him? How do we set him up and his organization up, which was a combined joint organization? How do we set him and the organization up for success? Likewise, more recently in Iraq and really the Middle East, Iraq, Syria was our footprint, but how do we set up the commanding general responsible for all coalition special operations for success in terms of his communication? So if that general is communicating to, let's say, the leader of all Kurdish forces in Syria, or the leader of the Jordanian intelligence chief, or an ambassador in Baghdad, etc., how do we set him up for going into engagement, and then how do we take the content of that engagement and ensure that the right people know what the key points were? So that was just a couple examples of different leadership roles. And again, as we progress through our careers, we all face different leadership roles. So what kind of model do we develop that can apply across those types of roles, where it kind of sets you up for success in any type of role? And for me, again, trying to distill it down to the basics, I look at people, mission, training, and resources. And let's start with people, and it's simply identifying who's on your team, their strengths, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. We talk about people first in the Army, and I'm sure it's similar at Panasonic, but people first sometimes means how do you care for not just the individual that works on your team, but how do you demonstrate some care or show some care for their family? That obviously can go a long way at different times. How do you counsel and give feedback? Is it regular? Is it valuable for them? How do you hold your team accountable? And then how do we communicate? Is there effective means to communicate so that we don't over communicate? And do we have a good feedback loop? So everything starts and ends with the people that we have on our teams. So I like to focus there first. The next part being mission. I'm in Army recruiting right now, so this looks a lot different than, for instance, a small 12-man team, largely doing tactical operations as part of a bigger picture in Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, you have to define as a leader, what does a win look like? What does a win look like for the duration of your mission? What does a win look like on a daily basis? And for us, we're in a numbers game essentially here, but it's also a people business. We try to change lives every day by offering career opportunities, but we can talk what a win looks like in Army recruiting via numbers. And so you define that, and then you provide an overall vision for your organization. It's important to show or to describe what your intent is as a leader. What are the left and right limits where you expect your team to operate within? And then your priorities. Sometimes you'll have enduring priorities that never change throughout, and those probably translate across organizations. And then you've probably got periodic priorities based on whether it's the time of year, if you're in sales, or if you're in recruiting like us. A lot hinges on the school year and the fiscal year. So our priorities from that perspective may change quarterly. And then again, you always need a feedback loop. So for your mission, what's your feedback loop? How do you know if you're achieving your goals? And then how do you course correct if not? Moving on to training and then resources and sustainment. Again, just to round out my conceptual model that I think can apply across organizations and roles. The training piece is clearly important, and that looks different in different organizations. Do you outsource training? Do you have internal training, formal, informal, etc.? It's worth thinking through, and I'm sure Panasonic has some tremendous training programs. And then finally, resources and sustainment. What are we responsible for internally within our organization? And then again, what do we outsource? What's the regularity of that? And then how do we bring a sense of urgency and kind of tracking mechanisms to ensure that our systems are in place, our facilities are maintained, which for us is a challenge here as we lease facilities and we work with the United States Army Corps of Engineers to kind of manage the facilities, et cetera. So, and that extends to our government vehicles and beyond. But again, it's for me, it's people, mission, training, and resources, I think, is a simple model, and then identifying some themes. So again, another potential topic for discussion would be differences between corporate world leadership and military leadership. And I don't have the experience in the corporate world, but I think sometimes you can talk about maybe what's at stake, right? At its purest form in the military, in a more of a combat scenario, right? Your life is probably at stake almost each and every day, or at least each and every mission. And that might not be the case in a civilian career, but that's not to diminish what is at stake in a civilian career, because at the end of the day, people are trying to put food on their families' plates, and that organization is trying to survive. And we think of the large organizations, whether it's Ford Motor Company, Panasonic, Walmart, et cetera, and there's 100+ case studies of ones that don't survive. So you always, at the end of the day, there are existential points and existential questions and challenges for every organization, whether you're in ground combat or you're in a larger company such as Panasonic. Another difference may be culture and language. I mean, I think that's a given across your your various civilian companies, but also across the military. And the military's got its own culture and language, but within that, we've got our own unique, a lot of people like to call it tribes, but really it's just our services and then branches, and break it down from there. And then probably some fitness type expectations. There may be a bit less of that in the civilian world, but maybe not all the time. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of similarities, and that's why it's exciting to speak with you today and ultimately get your feedback as well. Chérie, if it's okay, I'm happy to go in and talk a bit, maybe some examples of some of the different leadership roles that I've had. But then after that, maybe turn it over to questions and answer. I'll defer to you on that, Chérie. Okay, I'll take the cue and continue then. So just to
sorry
highlight.
about that, Lieutenant Colonel. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I was stuck on mute. Unmute everyone. Yeah, absolutely. And we do have some pre-planned questions that definitely want to go over with you today, if we can take a moment.
Yep.
Okay, number one, having lived and worked around the world in multiple nations, plus your own personal travels throughout the globe, what sage leadership guidance have you learned on working across the various cultures, those competing national interests and personal political motivations, just to get everyone working in the correct direction, focused on a singular mission together?
Sure, thank you. Great question. Well, first, I think the first thing that comes to mind is have some patience, right? Whether we operate in the same language or not, there's got to be some cultural patience and some language patience, because things translate differently, and we got to understand that the communication automatically becomes a bit more challenging, and that's not a negative or a positive, but we have to be very clear in our communication, and we also have to probably double check and confirm, did our message get through the way we thought it got through? And then likewise, did we hear our partner the way they wanted us to hear what they bring to the table? And then you speak about motivations and interests. Whether it's our closest coalition partners, as we say, our Five Eye partners, or if it's any global partner, everybody's got their own interests. And I think we acknowledge that up front, that's okay, but we also have to understand what's the common interest that we share, and continue to reinforce that and continue to check that periodically and understand, hey, these are the 2, 3, or 4 things that this is why we're working together. This is why we are fighting together, and just continue to reinforce that. So having some patience, doubling down on communication, and then being willing, America is kind of like the big gorilla in the room a lot of times, the United States, whether it's our military, et cetera. But have some deference, understand that we can learn as much or more from our partners and the cultures in which we are working. And I think that goes a long way if we demonstrate that up front, demonstrate a willingness to learn and a willingness to incorporate some of what other cultures bring to the table. And I think that goes a long way. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question a bit.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. That was really, really a key point you made there. You know, on it's almost like approaching it with a little bit of humility as well.
Humility,
Um, yeah. So, your personal career, you know, with the United States Army, it's led you to experience several historical armed conflicts. In fact, you personally have served forward deployed multiple times into combat areas. Will you speak to some of the key lessons that you personally carried away as working as an integral part of a team, especially where you're in life or death circumstances with those team members? And when, for example, the medals that you've personally received, you knew that you had to step forward instead as that individual versus a teammate to take some sort of action.
Okay. I think it all starts with before, you know, maybe you don't always get a chance to do this, but ideally it starts with your training, hard, realistic training before you deploy. And it's in that setting where you can start to build trust and build teamwork. And as a leader, I think you know, sometimes being a good leader means sometimes, you know, you got to be a good follower. So, you know your role as a leader, but sometimes understand when it's time to follow. You demonstrate your ability to do that, but you also, there has to be some shared sacrifice and some shared risk. So whether you talk about it as like, hey, leaders got to be willing to get their hands dirty sometimes, leaders got to be willing to lead from the front sometimes, not all the time, but I think you got to demonstrate right from the get-go, and maybe it's a little bit clearer how you do that at the tactical military level, right? It's, you know, you've got a level of physicality to the job. So, hey, first off, can you hang physically? Can you carry your weight? And then when there's a situation, whether it's a firefight or any sort of tactical situation where there's risk involved, are you kind of shirking that and putting yourself at a position where you're not sharing that, or are you willing to do what it takes to be there and kind of be to the right and left of the individuals that you're serving with? At the same time, sometimes it's the leader's responsibility not to be right in the front, but to be able to coordinate resources and assets and make sure that that you're doing what it takes to mitigate risk right there on scene, and also to bring resources to bear in a, you know, might be a firefight type situation, but you're doing everything that only you can do as a leader to make that turn that situation into a win or bring advantages for your team. So again, to go back, I think it's the lead up, the training, building the trust through hard training, realistic training. But then once you're overseas, or really in the situation, whatever the type of situation is, it's demonstrating that you're all in, and just being consistent in that. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I think the part about not just the risk, you know, that you highlight, because it seems hard to envision in that sort of situation that you're actually going through the logic as well, right, of diminishing risk and things like that. I didn't expect that. That was kind of an interesting answer.
I think I could add one thing
yeah,
too.
Please elaborate.
You know, when you're in a situation with a group of folks, with a group of people, when your lives are on the line and you're doing it repeatedly day after day, people want to know that the leader in this case is doing everything they can to make it worth it for them, right? And making it worth it for them is looking out for them as much as you possibly can. But a lot of times, I think what people want to be able to do is to be able to speak and be able to speak their piece. And so it's important, for instance, on a small 12-man special forces detachment and in an infantry platoon, you want that the youngest, most junior person in that group, whether it's my driver in a Stryker combat vehicle or the junior weapons sergeant on a 12-man ODA, they see some things or they have some insight that's valuable and that may ultimately save a life or help you succeed on a mission. So finding a way to allow them to speak up at times and allow them to give their input I think it's part of it's a pressure release valve. They feel like, okay, I get to put my word in, and then two, there a lot of times you're getting some very valuable feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And I think maybe even ownership, right? Of feeling like they're more vested in the situation. They're not just an observer, but they're actually a participant. Excellent. So another question, will you please speak to just leadership and fear? I think a lot of people grapple with this. Certainly you've been in those countless situations, from jumping out of an aircraft, which to me just sounds so terrifying, to facing directly an enemy. How did you experience this as a special forces officer, fear specifically, and how did you overcome it to just move forward, lead, and bring everybody to success in whatever task was in front of you?
Okay. Yep, jumping out of airplanes. I've always been pretty afraid of heights, and I learned that early in life, trying to do some rock climbing. And so whether it was basic airborne school, that most folks that go infantry as an officer get an opportunity to go to, or then I didn't choose it. I got assigned to a military free fall special forces detachment, which free fall it's just a different form of jumping out of an airplane, and it's all it is an infiltration technique. But by virtue of being on that detachment, there was a requirement for me to gain that skill. And so for me, I just remember the first time jumping out of a plane, you're with a group of people, the person in front of you is going to jump, the person behind you is going to jump. And I think you need to, for me at least, it's embracing the opportunity to overcome your fears, and more importantly, probably come out of your comfort zone. I think we grow a lot in those instances when we come out of our comfort zones, and heights is not a comfort zone for me. So that's been valuable. And then let's say I get an opportunity. It's a training jump in Korea. We jumped from it was 18,000 plus feet. It was a really cool training jump with our Korean partners. And in fact, I think maybe one of your pictures shows whether it's that jump or a different one in Korea where we did a re-enlistment on the back of the aircraft before jumping. But as the commander of that unit, it's like, okay, here's an opportunity for me to step up and overcome something for me, but also demonstrate leadership by just saying, I'm going to be the first one out. So that's that example. The combat example for me would be, I think psychologically, the scariest thing would be the IED. So improvised explosives, any sort of kind of mine device that we know very well. For the last 20 years, we saw a lot of use of that. I think there's a psychological effect. So I'm not unique in that case, but I think what you do is you do everything you can to try to mitigate the risk, and understand, you're in it just like everybody else, and then you gotta try to turn that off and focus on the mission and not dwell on the risk factors, because there's always going to be risk factors. So you can't overly dwell on it, because we've probably lost just as many people as a U.S. Army to rollover accidents and other types of vehicle accidents, if you will, as well as IED. So if you dwell on one thing, maybe you're missing out on identifying another risk.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And I like how you really highlighted the part about the team, cohesiveness and collaboration. It's like, it sounds like in some of those instances, just knowing that you're all in the similar situation, you're all facing the same risks together, it also seems like it's kind of motivating to help you maybe step up for those junior members to say, okay, well, I'll do this first. I think that was such a great example, is I'll jump out the aircraft first. Of course, I'm scared too, but let's do it, and I think that you really illustrated that well. So lastly, you've got this extensive collection of photographs, which is just amazing. And I'd like to see if we could share a few comments specifically on a few of them that we're going to show on screen on each of these that I selected from your albums to share with kind of our veterans and Panasonic employees. Next slide, please. So, and apologies, one more slide forward. So many great pictures. So I think specifically on this one where you're on an aircraft and it looks like somebody's doing a swearing in ceremony, maybe with their arm raised. Can you kind of highlight that to us?
Yes, that was, I think, probably what I just mentioned. We did a re-enlistment ceremony prior to a military freefall jump in the Republic of Korea. So we had some Korean partners on the aircraft with us. And I think it's It's valuable internally for our non-commissioned officer that was re-enlisting that day. But I think it also, we like to say one of the differences or one of the things that sets us apart as a U.S. Army and U.S. military is the degree to which we care for, really empower, train, and delegate to our non-commissioned officers. We've got non-commissioned, so these are folks that enlist in the Army, don't necessarily go officer. It's not to say that some of them don't have undergraduate or ultimately graduate degrees, but historically in a lot of armies, in a lot of militaries, there was no empowerment. It's just you're going to do what you're told. That's it. You're treated a certain way, and there was a large gap in the officer rank and the enlisted. And they don't even eat together. But for us, we take a lot of pride in that, and so showing how we make a big deal out of the re-enlistment for our non-commissioned officers, doing it in cool, unique ways, which this would be one, but we usually leave it up to that non-commissioned officer. How do they want their re-enlistment ceremony to go? And then we make it happen for them.
So in this particular instance, had he intended to do this re-enlistment in the aircraft, or was that kind of like just it worked out? How was that planned? This
particular NCO asked for it. He loved military free fall, and I think after this assignment, he actually became an instructor down in Yuma, Arizona. So.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, this looks to me like this photograph came out of Life magazine. So I just absolutely love it. I think it's such a great photograph. Next slide, please. And in this one, of course, I had shared with you, I have a Belgian dog. And so I just really was drawn to this photograph because this could be me, any evening sleeping with my pup. But it seems like you're not, you're in some sort of austere environment here. So can you speak to this one?
Yep, this great memories. So I grew up with German Shepherds because my mom trains them for a dog sport called Schutzen. So I've always had an affinity for dogs, but Malinois and Shepherds are commonly used as working dogs in the military. And we always had, I think it was a Malinois, 3 different Malinois while we were in Afghanistan. So this was part of our 12-man team in Afghanistan. We were doing a long, for us, what was a long mission. It was a 3-day mission, 2 nights or 3 nights. The area that we were in was split, tribal split between the Pashtun tribe. So it was about 70% Pashtun, 30% Hazaran. And if folks know their kind of some Afghan history, tribal history, the Hazarans were, a minority tribe, historically very, very discriminated against, but also ethnically tied to Genghis Khan. So they almost kind of look a little bit Mongolian or Asian. But as we moved into Hazaran areas, we had some very strong partners, and typically some of those areas were a bit more secure. So this was a local Hazaran school, probably about 40 or 50 kilometers northeast of our headquarters in Khazar-Ruzgan district, south central Afghanistan. And so we had been patrolling for a day and a half probably. We're taking a break, and I always like being by the dogs. I think I probably fell asleep this time, but it's not to say we didn't have security. We always had layered security with both partner forces and our own, but in this case, you can clearly see I wasn't securing anything. So.
It's just such, again, I think this photograph could be in Life magazine. It's just fascinating to me to kind of see this moment of downtime with your teammates, and especially it illustrates, what you were talking about earlier with the training together. It almost seems like your family, family members together in this room, with the pup. And so on the next slide, please. This is General Gary Brito, and I like this photo. This photo looks a little more diplomatic to me as well. And I had the opportunity, thank you so much, to come to Los Angeles and hear him speak live. And I'm just so curious. Number one, where are you in this photograph, and what are you saying? What is everybody so captivated by?
So I think General Brito, who's our Army Training and Doctrine Commander, he's probably thinking, tell this Lieutenant Colonel to stop talking now. But so this was actually, Chérie, this was in the Bob Hope Patriotic Hall where we held that, but it was in their historic library room. And unfortunately, you can't see the rest of the room, but it's a beautiful facility. If anybody's ever in Los Angeles, this Bob Hope Patriotic Hall is open I think 5 days a week, and it's recently renovated. Beautiful, beautiful facility. A lot of awesome murals, and it dates back to kind of post-Civil War time in the United States. And the building itself is about 8 floors, 8 maybe more. But in this case, what we did, General Brito was in town for 2 days, and what we did was the Army in Los Angeles. Most people don't think of Army in Los Angeles, but we've actually got a pretty good team. And so we wanted to do an Army roundtable where we brought in leaders from all aspects of the Army in Los Angeles, Army ROTC at USC, UCLA, etc. Army officer recruiting, Army medical recruiting, myself and my team representing the enlisted recruiting side, both active and reserves. And then there's a number of other organizations to include reserve units, which part-time service, National Guard units, et cetera. So essentially, we probably had about 20 plus people in the room, and we were highlighting how important it is to understand that we're not all working in a stovepipe, but that we're one Army team in Los Angeles, to include our nearby Fort Irwin. Yes, it's 2.5 hours away, but that is our closest active duty Army base. So just to reinforce for the general that he's got a team of leaders on the ground here in Los Angeles that represent the almost full spectrum of kind of Army entities, and that once we come together, we can be a powerful team.
Yeah, and I think that if we go to the next slide, please, I think that segments really well into this, because it's like, here you are leading, right? And you're, like you said, I mean, people don't expect the Army is embedded in Los Angeles. That's not something you would automatically think of, correct? But then here, it's like you're in Korea, I believe. You've got the South Korean flag there. And so just such a stark contrast in your leadership between where you are there, here domestically at home and abroad. Can you kind of speak to where are you? It looks like you were doing some sort of outing as a team with Koreans.
Yes. So this is a unique unit. It's the 39th Special Forces Detachment in Korea, otherwise known as Det 39 or Det K, being Det Korea. This small entity's been in Korea. Literally, the organization dates back to the end of the Korean War. And the purpose of the organization, it's commanded by a Special Forces Major, and then his partner, a Special Forces Sergeant Major. And then it's really no officers. It's probably about 10 Special Forces Master Sergeants who liaise directly with our Korean Special Forces partners. So Korea's got probably 7, give or take 7 Special Forces brigades that are spread throughout the Korean Peninsula. So our job is to liaise, integrate into and with, and train with our Korean Special Forces partners, so that we understand how they operate, they understand how we operate, and should it be required to fight together, we can fight much more seamlessly and integrate larger units that would come to the peninsula into and with our partners, and better support them, and just be mutually supporting and mutually capable. So this was our winter warfare training in, this would have been, I think, 2018. It was 2 weeks before the Winter Olympics in Korea in Pyeongchang.
Wow.
It was very cold. We hadn't, some snow, but they did get more snow. There was some snow, but it was just winter warfare training. We had Korean partners embedded with us. In fact, that unit's got a full-time Korean Special Forces Sergeant Major that lives and works with the unit. So very tight group, and it's a good experience. And then most of us got to see some of the Olympics.
Oh, nice. What an excellent extra add-on that you probably weren't expecting. Yeah, this is fascinating to just learn about some of this international things that go on that we, as the average citizen of not just the United States, but other nations are not realizing that this sort of training is occurring in the background in these kind of partnerships. And I just wanted to highlight quickly. So I think when you and I were discussing, you served in Korea for several years, correct?
That's correct. I did an initial tour in 2005 in mechanized infantry north of Seoul. And then more recently in 2017 to 19, I did one tour as the commander of this detachment, and one year as the executive officer for the commander of special operations on the peninsula, U.S. commander.
Wow, that's just incredible. And I think I mentioned briefly in the introduction about the fact that you had studied conversational Mandarin, which I just thought was the neatest thing because I think it's so important that we learn non-Romance languages, we're able to communicate. So that's just really excellent. It seems like you've had a lot of experience in Asia. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And this was I erred when I originally saw this photo saying, oh, I think that's the Taliban. I've worked with the Afghans. I've resettled here in the United States, so I'm a little familiar, but nowhere near the level that you would have been actually being in their nation state. And this photograph, though, I think you had a little bit of a story behind it, if you want to speak to that.
Sure. This was on our small base, kind of 200 meter by 200 meter compound in Afghanistan, and this would have been in 2011 in Khazar-Uzgan, Afghanistan. And the guy to my, I think it would be to my, in the picture to my left, but to my right, that not the guy that I'm shaking hands with, but the guy with the radio in his hand is a gentleman named Nida Mohammed. Nida was all three men are Pashtun. And the guy on the far other side was the district governor, would have been his title, so kind of the governmental leader of the area. But all three of them would have been Taliban, probably even up to a year prior. And it's probably very, very safe to say that many of them maintain some of those historic connections because, as we know, the Taliban is deeply rooted in the Pashtun tribe. And to be honest, in this part of Afghanistan, Uruzgan province, the ties go back, much longer than we were there. But probably 6 to 9 months before I arrived, so when the previous Special Forces detachment was on the ground, Nida Mohammed there with the radio said, "Hey, I see where some things are going. I'm going to shift my allegiance, at least publicly." And I think his deeds, which I'll highlight in a second, demonstrated that he was all in. But he shifted his allegiance. He said, I'm coming in behind you. I support your mission. I'm going to support you. How do we partner together?" And with him probably came 200 fighters, right? Because he had sway over numerous villages in the area and numerous sub-tribes under the Pashtun tribe. So Nida shifted sides, if you will. And we for probably the first 4 or 5 months I was on the ground, conducted a lot of operations with him, with his forces. His two sons were also pretty significant leaders in the area. Unfortunately, it wasn't but a couple weeks probably after this photo, he was killed in a Taliban attack on one of his many outposts. But then the guy that I'm shaking hands with to my other side, he was just a stakeholder in the area that owned a lot of property and therefore had a lot of sway. And again, the other gentleman was a district governor who we worked with the entirety of my time there. Pretty closely, and he lived nearby, so we probably talked to all of them probably weekly at a minimum.
I think, yeah, what Stark is interesting is whether we're looking at the photograph where you're in South Korea or we're looking at the photograph in Afghanistan. I think my key takeaway on both of these is just that relationship building, and that speaks to, like you said, authenticity and being engaged, and really, really all into vested, in the local area that you're working within. Thank you so much. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Hindert, for sharing with us all of these incredible memories and career experiences. I do want to allow a moment to just take some questions from our team in the audience as well. The number one, first and foremost, was Jerry. Why did you choose to join the Army? And I can add on to that wonderful question. Specifically, why did you decide to go Special Forces? Where was the draw in that?
Thanks, Chérie and Jerry. I was soccer and sports were a big part of my identity in life growing up, kind of year round. The only expectation I had was, hey, I'm supposed to go to college. I'm supposed to play soccer. Well, I went to college and I played soccer freshman year and realized I was completely burnt out on the sport. And ultimately, I went about 20 years without touching the ball again until being in Korea, and I played in men's league, international men's league, which was fun. But I was in college, international studies major. I had read a book about special operations in Vietnam when I was in high school that, it was in the back of my head, but not in the forefront. the military wasn't something I considered. And same thing, I read a book about Marine Corps boot camp in high school, and I always liked physical challenges, physicality, competition, etc. Well, I was reading an old school newspaper, an actual newspaper, at lunch one day, and I saw just a tiny little ad. It said, "Try an Army ROTC summer camp." So essentially, kind of a boot camp for ROTC and officers at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I'm very fortunate I saw that, and I'm very fortunate I took the opportunity, because I went down to this camp, or kind of mini boot camp. 6 weeks later, at the end of it, they offered me a scholarship. They said, "Hey, we'll pay for your last 2 years of school if you do 4 years in the Army." And at that point, I had learned what Army Ranger School was. I had an infantry drill sergeant that I was looking up to, and I just knew, I said, man, that's something that I can get paid to do. I can go do something physical. It's something I can put on paper as a goal. And I never saw myself doing a career out of it, but I said, I don't know what I want to do right after school. I don't want to go to grad school. There's nothing that's really calling me in kind of business wise. And so I took a bit of a leap of faith, and it worked out. And then the infantry was a great place for me to start in my career. And it gave me that opportunity to basic airborne school, Ranger school, do a deployment to Iraq, see Korea, etc. But as I started looking at the Army, which is probably the largest, I think it is the largest service in terms of personnel, there's a lot of different pathways you can take. And as everyone knows, when we mature in life and grow and age, different things become important to us over time. And so my aperture opened up, if you will, in terms of recognizing, wow, here's something else challenging and a goal that I can strive for, trying out for Special Forces. But probably more importantly than that, because that's probably feeding ego a bit, but from the developmental side, it gave me an opportunity to learn a language. I was attracted to that. It gave a broader mission set. It gave more opportunity to work with international partners, more unique career assignments, and some very special, challenging training that, and then also probably most importantly, just a slightly older, more mature, seasoned group of individuals that you work with on a daily basis that really attracted me to the Special Forces route.
Yeah, no, it's just absolutely fascinating, your career path too. I had a few coworkers at my desk yesterday, and we were marveling over your photographs of just like what an exciting, going into the corporate world for sure is exciting. We go and we kind of do what we're passionate about. Like, for example, me, international business, but I didn't get to travel all over the world and live there extensively like you did, for example, in Korea and things like that. So what a great experience is to marry into your career track. It's just really incredible. Another question. So companies are moving towards a hybrid work style. How is the U.S. military adapting to that? Because I know, for example, in my particular Panasonic company, where I historically was in the office every day, now I'm a hybrid employee. So I work from home, I work in the office. We've kind of had to adapt and overcome post-COVID to just kind of the new work style. So is that changing at all for the U.S. military, where it's kind of a little more hybrid? I imagine you guys would kind of need to be in person more, right?
I think so. I mean, I arrived at the Pentagon. My last assignment, it was a 2-year assignment at the Pentagon, and I arrived coming from Iraq, and this would have been August of 2020. So still, at least in that part of the country, still kind of the height of COVID. So the Pentagon very quickly and very extensively went to remote work. I thought I didn't like it. I figured, hey, I have 2 years here. I want to experience being in the building as much as possible, but also personally, and this is just me speaking, I see a lot of value in the face-to-face interaction. You can have more informal conversations that might not happen if you're just dialing into a hour-long meeting throughout the day. And then, you can get to know folks on a more personal level. I kind of feed off that. I need that during the day. I didn't like being holed up in my apartment just on a computer system. But at the same time, I think you also have to find ways to embrace the technology. For instance, our recruiting NCOs now, this is just as powerful as a computer, and they can do some work or have some network support while they're on the move, whether they're doing a high school engagement or they're traveling for an event, etc. So I think you embrace the technology, but just me personally, I lean towards when and where possible, the face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent. So there are definitely some things that you just can't get when you're not in person there. And I did speak to someone actually at the DoD who works at the Pentagon the other day. We were doing a call in his front room. But yeah, I think he communicated to me he does go in, several days a week, but then there's a little more flexibility maybe than in the past to be able to take those calls at home if you need to. One more question. What do you see as challenges of being a veteran, and how should we consider to relate?
Challenges, I think
kind of a tough question because you're not there yet.
No,
You're
okay.
still in the active side.
I think a challenge, maybe it's a responsibility. I think as veterans, if folks don't know, the fact is less than 1% of the U.S. population serves in the Army. And then within that, there's a high percentage of folks that serve that come from military families. I wasn't necessarily one. I mean, my grandfather served in the Navy in World War II, but my direct family, my dad, mom, I didn't have that growing up. But that means there's a bit of a divide, and I think it's a growing divide between our service population, our military service population, and our civilian just society. So I think there's a responsibility on us as veterans to go out and interact and engage and tell the story, and also just highlight a lot of the benefits. I mean, there's clearly challenges and such as well with a military career, but we need to do a better job. And I see that probably more so now, right, because I'm in recruiting. But yeah, I think it's just trying to do what we can, even if it's just a little bit, to help bridge that divide and ensure that this is still and can continue to be an all-volunteer force that we as a nation can take pride in and that we're all vested in. There's probably, you can categorize groups of people all different ways, whether it's race, whether it's financial strata, whether it's what schools folks go to, but I think it's probably fair to say that there probably are some groups that aren't maybe as represented as they could or should be in our military, whether that's at the lowest levels or at the highest levels. And I think we want to just strive to make sure that we've got good representation, and so that everybody can be proud of that and know that, hey, if we're deploying, everybody's all in. So it's not just an easy button that, a political decision we can send and put the military at risk, but that no, it's all parts of the population are vested.
No, that was incredibly well said. And I think that's one of the things specifically with military children, like I think you alluded to, is that they are more likely to serve because they've seen that example of service throughout their lifetime. So Lieutenant Colonel Hindert, just give you briefly any closing remarks?
My only closing remarks, Chérie, is again, I just want to thank you and thank the team that's on here. It's an honor. I know that my leadership perspective is just one perspective, but I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of awesome leadership experience, both from military service, our international partners, et cetera. And it's always great to be able to connect with people, and hopefully at some point I can face to face with some of your team and hear more from them. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Hindert. I can't tell you truly for gifting us with your time today and just the leadership wisdom that you've garnered, like you said, personally throughout your career traversing the world. It's just been a really incredible dialogue today. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. And I just want to ask everyone to please join us for our next guest speaker. That'll be in June, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Bob Hotchkiss. Bob was the former program manager of the Atlas V rocket. So we're going to shift gears a little bit over into the space arena. And also he held multiple leadership roles within the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office. So he's been a personal mentor of mine. Very, very excited to hear what he's going to share with us in June. Next slide, please. And again, I said it in the beginning, if you're a United States military veteran, please reach out to self-identify and join us. Or if you're just simply interested in supporting the cause, becoming a member, please reach out to us as well. All Panasonic employees across all the Panasonic North American companies, you're all welcome to join and participate. As I shared, I'm not specifically a veteran, so please reach out if you have any questions at all. Next slide, please. In the Veterans Crisis Line, I just want to share this in every opportunity we have. This is now so simple. You dial 988, you press 1. This line goes to the VA and you'll be able to speak with someone instantly. And next slide, please. Thank you again to the Lieutenant Colonel and to everyone for joining us today. It's been a really great discussion, and we'll see you next time. Take care.